There are so many features we need to see in the next Sony FX3. Now don't get me wrong, the Sony FX3 is almost a perfect camera. However, there are some big upgrades that I think the next camera desperately needs. In this video, I'll point out some of the features I think the Sony FX3 Mark II desperately should include, as well as the likelihood of it appearing in the next camera as well. Let's start off with the obvious one that I think is pretty much a guarantee at this point, and that is the inclusion of shutter angle. We've heard the announcement, and I've done a whole video about it, that the FX3 will be getting shutter angle later this year, so it goes without saying that of course the Mark II will have shutter angle as well. Next up is control over the noise reduction. It's probably the biggest complaint people have of the current Sony FX3, and that is the noise reduction can be a bit too aggressive often and can result in quite mushy looking footage. This is probably the biggest issue with the current image quality. The only way around that is to shoot ProRes RAW, but then that has its own issues and problems you have to work around. Personally, I just want to be able to see the ability to control the noise reduction in the camera. Sometimes it is very useful to have a stronger noise reduction. It can be great to have an image straight at camera that looks really nice and keeps it nice and clean. However, often you want that additional control, and I think if you're calling this a cinema camera, then that should be expected. After all, we get it on the FX6, and I think it's now time to bring it to the next line of Sony FX3. I actually think it's quite a high likelihood that we will see this added to the camera. It's an easy addition, it doesn't really cost anything to do it, and it just kind of pleases people. I think the only reason the current FX3 doesn't have the controls is because they pretty much ported the camera over from the A7S III until they did that major update. So I think that's the reason why it didn't have it in the first place. But certainly the Mark II, I think definitely will. Third up is global shutter. Now, this isn't a guarantee. I think it's probably very likely that we will see global shutter on the next Sony FX3. This does feel like the generation that global shutter becomes the standard on certainly the higher end cameras. We're already seeing it on the Red cameras, and of course now we're seeing it on the Sony A7 IV as well, so it's appearing on Sony cameras. It makes sense the next big flagship camera from Sony after the A9, probably the FX3 Mark II, would make sense to also have global shutter as well. Now, of course, there could be a bit of a dynamic range hit from that, and that would be a shame to see that, but it does seem from tests so far that perhaps the hit isn't too bad and acceptable for the added ability of global shutter. Something that has been rumoured and something that people have been begging for over the years is an optional EVF for the FX3. Now I know I'm hearing you, why not just go out and get a Sony A7S III? Well, yeah, that's a great option, but of course it lacks the built-in fan, you don't have all the controls, all those kind of things. And to be honest, I don't think there will be an A7S Mark IV. I think they're kind of probably scrapping that series. It just makes more sense to have the Sony FX3 as your portable full-frame cinema camera, and then have the addition, using that hot shoe, of an EVF if you wish to have one. It's a great upsell. Certainly I probably would go out and buy one, because there's so many times where an EVS is so incredibly useful. And the Sony EVFs are really nice. I really like using the EVFs on their other cameras, so I just like to see it on this one as well. What are the chances of seeing this optional EVF for the FX3 Mark II? Well, I'm going to go mid. I think there's a middle chance that we might see it. I'm not going to say it's a high chance, even though it has been rumoured. It's just something that I can't imagine Sony actually doing. I can imagine them not bothering doing the extra R&D required to add an accessory like that. They probably wouldn't think there would be enough sales to make it worthwhile. However, if an A7S Mark III isn't coming out, then perhaps this is the time for them to introduce one. Something that I think is desperately needed across all Sony cameras is an upgrade to the screen. Something that's bigger, something that's brighter, and something that's much more sharper. There has been some small upgrades. The FX30 has a better screen than the FX3, for example, and I'm sure the new A9 has a great screen as well. However, none of these have really transformed the back of the Sony cameras. They still have a far too small screen that's just not bright enough. Unfortunately, this seems to be a common thing across all camera manufacturers. The C70 screen isn't too bad. That's basically what I'd like to see on the FX3. I think that wouldn't be unreasonable. I think it is possible to fit a screen of that size on a body of an FX3. Obviously, the winner of built-in screens when it comes to cameras is the Blackmagic Pocket series. They have amazing screens. The Pocket 6K Pro, I love the screen on the back of that thing. Now, it is huge and it wouldn't be appropriate for a smaller camera like the FX3, but certainly a daylight viewable screen that is nice and sharp and easy to see, and perhaps maybe 3.5, 4 inches in size, is something that we should see on the next FX3. Will we see it though? Honestly, I don't feel too hopeful. I'm going to say it's a mid chance of seeing some sort of upgrade. It will be better than before, but not probably what I want or what we should have in 2024. Everyone is talking about OpenGate, and it is very exciting to be able to use the entire sensor. It makes sense, the sensor's right there in the camera anyway, so why not use the full height of the 3x2 sensor? Once again, I think there's probably a mid chance of it happening. I could see it because the competition have been introducing OpenGate to their cameras, so it would be the obvious next step from Sony. They have the space on the sensor, and if they're sticking to a more like 4K sensor and not upgrading it to a higher resolution, then they actually have the processing power in the small body to be able to handle it. The Panasonic seems to be able to handle it absolutely fine, so let's see it on the next Sony cameras. Something I see no one talk about is the fact that the current Sony FX3 doesn't let you do full screen HDMI with info on display as well. You get the annoying almost back of screen version instead, which is just not that good at all. It means you end up with a very low quality image and you're not using the full width of your external monitor, and when the screen is so small on the camera, you really want to be using an external monitor most of the time. But, and sadly, you can't do that while also seeing all your camera info. Let's see an upgrade of that, Sony. We really need to see an upgrade of the output. It's not been a problem with their higher end lines like the FX6 and FX9. And once again, I think this is a hangover from the fact that this is sort of an alpha cam that's been converted into the cinema line. But I think with the Mark II, they can kind of get away from the Alpha series and focus in on having features that should be appearing on a cinema camera. So certainly, HDMI output full screen with info should be expected. It looks great on cameras like the Canon C70 and certainly even better on cameras like the Blackmagic Pocket 6K Pro, so let's have it now on the FX3 as well. I actually think this is quite a high chance of appearing on the next camera. Yes, no one's talking about it, but it's an easy upgrade and just brings the FX3 in line with the rest of their cinema lineup. False color is something that I wish the Sony FX3 had. It's just an extremely useful tool to have built into a camera. Yes, you can get monitors nowadays for very cheap that have it built in, but it's never as good as having it built into the actual camera body itself. You can truly trust that that is reading it correctly, whereas monitors, you can make mistakes with the outputs you're doing and various other things on how it reads. Once again, the Blackmagic Pocket 6K Pro and the C70 do this great, so I'd expect to see it on the FX3 in the future as well. Unfortunately though, even though they've added it to the app, the monitor control app, I don't think we'll see it on the next Sony FX3. It's just something that for some reason Sony don't really do. They never put it on the FX6, so if that camera didn't get false color, then sadly I don't hold out much hope that we'll get it on the next FX3 either. ND filters is a dream everyone has for the next Sony FX3, but unfortunately I think it's pretty low chance of happening. Yes, the new Burano sounds like it can do both sensor stabilization and ND filters. That is awesome, so there's no limitation there while also being an E-mount. However, I think because of the tiny size of the FX3, we're not quite there with technology just yet. I'd be highly surprised if we saw it on the next FX3. Instead, it probably won't be till the Mark III or whatever that ends up being called that we actually start seeing that tech in the Sony cameras. In 2024, despite all the issues with the patents, we need to see RAW built into all of our cameras, all of our professional cameras at the very least. It's fine to be doing external outputs and things like that, but it's just not as good as an internal RAW codec. And Sony has a great codec, and I think it's just time to start implementing that into the smaller bodies. Even if you have to pay red, if that's a requirement to get around it, then that's what I'd like to see. Or even a paid upgrade. That would actually be a fair kind of choice so that you've got a reason to spend a bit more money and get the RAW if you need it. But if you don't need it, then you don't need to spend the extra cash. Regardless of the politics of it all, why it does or doesn't have RAW in cameras nowadays, I just want to see that moving forward. I think we've been long enough using these compressed codecs, and which are great and they do the job day to day. However, we should be able to really maximize the use of the sensor. Imagine having a stills camera that couldn't shoot RAW. I feel that's where we're at now with video cameras. We should expect it in our cinema cameras at the very least, regardless of the size of the body. Will we see it though? Well, I'm going to say there's a mid chance of it happening. I think it's more likely than some of the other things I've been talking about, but at the same time, there's still that issue of red, and whether there can be any agreement made between Sony and Red to use RAW, that is a big question when it comes to a camera like the FX3. Another feature that no one has ever pointed out, and that is we should have dual USB-C now on cameras like the FX3. Why is that the case? Why would we want to see two USB slots rather than just one? Well, there's a few reasons. First off, if you're tethering, it's a great way of also being able to power your camera at the same time. Use that USB-C port so you can tether to a laptop perhaps, you can transfer footage and photos instantly. That'd be an awesome feature to have on certain shoots. But also so you can power simultaneously at the same time, or maybe have accessories that are connected via USB-C. There's so many reasons why I think multiple USB-Cs would be great. They've still got that multi-port on there, which to me seems a bit outdated and pointless. Let's get past that. Let's now have two USB-C ports on there so that you can both power the camera as well as control things at the same time, or even better, maybe even record to an SSD. Will it happen though? No, probably not. No one's really talked about it. I can't imagine this is a feature they will be adding, but I think it would be really cool if they did. Finally, and this is something that I think once again in 2024 we really should be seeing an upgrade for, and that is an improved app. An app on your phone that connects directly to your camera nice and easily and works really well in giving you a full res image on your phone so that you don't have to have a whole big wireless monitor set up. Wireless systems we've seen from the likes of Apple and what they do with the Vision Pro can be very good. You can transmit a wireless 4K feed without a problem and it looking absolutely wonderful. So why can't we do that with our professional camera gear, which costs just as much? This is something that really does frustrate me, and the fact that the only people get close to this is Red with the new Komodo X. That is looking pretty good when it comes to its wireless connection. Still not perfect though. Why can't anyone crack this? I feel like if anyone, someone like Sony should be able to achieve this sort of technology, as they have already their entire mobile division that they can work with. I think there's a mid chance that we'll see a massively improved app, and I say massively improved because sure, they'll do small upgrades, there'll be small improvements with the latency and the quality, but I really think we need to see something game-changing, something where we see a massive improvement and basically make wireless monitors a thing of the past. So there you go, that is my list of features that I really want to see in the next Sony FX3. Is there anything that I missed out there, or anything you're particularly excited by or hoping to see in the next camera? If there is anything, please leave a comment down below because I'd love to hear what you think. If you enjoyed this video, then why not check out some of my other videos, including this review of the Tamron 35-150, an absolutely awesome lens for your Sony FX3.